You're kidding. Little punk tries to throw me off a train. We get into a fight and he falls off. Cops ask me why I did a thing like that. I tell them why. For 3 hours, I tell them why. They don't believe me.
What's up, guys? Yeah, man. Hey, guys. Welcome to the inaugural Political Brownies Podcast. My name's Kyrie. I'm here with my co-host today, Ricky Leach. Yeah, we're just here talking. A lot of craziness going on with this election, huh?
Fuck the election, man. Fuck the election. We out here, man, living life.
Yeah.
That's all you can do, Can't worry about national elections like that,
Yeah, it's just, after a while it gets kind of tiring, doesn't it?
Yeah, like a marathon. U.S. elections are like a marathon.
Yeah.
Keep going and going.
Yeah, like a reality show, huh?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Because I just feel like the way like elections are like broadcast nowadays, it's not like informative. I mean, the news in general is not even really informative. It's like, you got MSNBC, that's like the arm of the Democratic Party. You got Fox News, the arm of the Republican Party. It's like both sides are trying to like showcase a narrative to sort of like reinforce their sort of like view of the world. It's not necessarily to like inform the public on, okay, candidate A has this position on this issue, candidate B has this position on this issue, and let's have an ideological, discourse on the ideas. It's just, Democrats are evil, Republicans are evil, it's just,
So yeah, it's a cycle, it's like,
Yeah.
they feed off each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
By making the other person the boogeyman, they feed off each other and they divide the country even more.
Yeah.
And make it more polarized. They're pretty much the public more polarized in the United States.
And it's rather peculiar because, it's these multinational corporations that are, power centers for a lot of these media corporations. It's the classic divide and conquer while the rich man, runs under the back door for all the money.
Yeah, because a lot of times you look at, these like venture capitalists or these corporations, they actually feed off of chaos. They like chaos, they like uncertainty because it causes people to act in certain ways. Human instincts, cause them to act in certain ways that are, I guess, beneficial to them. The gun market, all the uncertainty, gun sales have gone up in California. They've gone up in a lot of areas. So
Fear sells, yeah.
Fear sells a lot, And it, even social media too, like a lot of times the algorithms they can create echo chambers because they want you to watch a video. It's like the documentary Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
The Social Dilemma is like talking about how it create echo chambers because it recommends videos that it thinks are going to make you watch the longest. You'll watch the longest. So it ends up recommending videos that are similar. But that can put you down a rabbit hole, as like the director of the Social Dilemma was saying.
Yeah. Here's the thing, like I get what you're saying, but I don't know what's an easy solution to this problem that we're in our society. Like people on the left have talked about the Cambridge Analytica scandal, how Facebook is using nefarious forces of getting our data and all our information to prop up these public relation companies, and so sort of like reinforcing, like you were saying before, about these echo chambers. Like if you watch a pro-Trump video or God forbid like a QAnon video, the algorithm's going to continue to feed you that type of content in the same way. If you're watching a lot of left-wing content or whatnot, it's going to feed you that type of content. So they've talked about trying to decentralize that sense of power in a sense, but then there's a lot of problems that go along with it. Issues of free speech and who do we platform? There's a lot of crazes going on right now with I'm not going going to mention the name of the scandal, but I'm sure all you guys are aware about various instances of various, political commentators ranging from very controversial to a little bit controversial, but
It turned out to be vampires.
well, worse, they turn out to believe in that frogs, are gay. If you like, I don't want to get into that. That was the whole like Alice Jones bullshit,
Oh.
Yeah, or using like I don't know, like just using the Sandy Hook parents as props, like in his crazy ass conspiracy theories. Like there's sort of like a fine line, I guess, between the terms of service, and also just like libertarian values of free speech.
So Kyrie, let's get
all
into
stuff,
that.
yeah.
What ideology are you? Are you an anarcho-capitalist, socialist daredevil,
It's weird. It's weird.
libertarian lambassador?
I would like to think of myself as a general like center left person.
Whoa.
Yeah, come on, man. Yeah, how
What
about
kind
you?
of milk toast stuff is that? Center left? Come on.
Well, I mean, I guess a good way of putting it is center left on a global perspective, crazy left wing radical from a U.S. perspective. Yeah, sorry, there was a little bit of a technical difficulty, but I think where we left off was my whole issue is there's been a lot of like stories recently that have been getting censored, and for me, it's not so much like an electoral issue. Like some people will say, "Oh, you're being a useful idiot. You're helping Trump." It's not really about Trump at the moment because we all acknowledge that Trump's a very corrupt president, probably one of the most corrupt presidents in U.S. history. The fact that it's just classic nepotism that his own daughter is in his administration while she's profiting off the Trump name with her own private companies on the side. She made like $100 million along with her husband Jared Kushner in their first year in office. So let's like not be around the bush. Trump is a very corrupt and insidious person, but but also so is the Biden family in some aspects. I mean, obviously, maybe not on the same level, but I think that's information the public deserves to know. And listen, the public deserves to know like whether or not your son is using the family name to enrich himself, knowing that you're the former vice president of the United States, or you have the last name Biden, and it's a name with a lot of prestige in the world stage. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that Biden himself is directly profiting from it, but it's classic Washington corruption. I guess that's the distinction, but it does become like it becomes a bit of a governance issue. It's not really like an electoral issue anymore. One of my favorite journalists of our generation is Glenn Greenwald, and he recently...
Did he turn you into a leftist commie?
Funny enough, he turned me into like an anarcho-libertarian when I was like 17, 18 years old, during the whole like Edward Snowden debacle and all that. But then I became more of like a left-winger when I started following Bernie Sanders in 2015, 2016 era. So I've been all over the political spectrum, but nonetheless, he tried publishing a story about the Hunter Biden situation recently on his publication, The Intercept, that he founded. He co-founded it in response to the Edward Snowden leaks because he wanted more autonomous reporting. And the editors in his company that he founded denied it. Now, why? I mean, there's no like, it's like a he said, she said sort of thing that's going on right now. But I guess one can only presume that it's so close to the election, it's a few days. You don't want to like give the Trump team a talking point. But on the flip side, it does become like a bit of an issue about how we're going to do accurate reporting going forward. Like just because the election is around the corner doesn't mean that we shouldn't report on the facts, or at the very least, should we be able to discern whether or not those facts are, sufficient or not? Like, should we be able to do honest, objective reporting?
Should we even have a president? Should presidents
now you're talking like a real hippie.
Does the presidency even exist, bro? Should that position, the power that comes with it, or at least the homage of power, the style of power that even exist, or should it be more actual direct democracy instead of kind of like representative democracy it is now, where it's kind of like there's just like a couple layers to it, where it kind of filters
Yeah.
out by the time we get to the presidency.
Which is part of the reason why we're in this situation right now, where we have two corrupt white cisgender males. You know what I mean? It's like, it seems like every year, like, the choices become less and less distinct. And look, I understand Trump's the type of guy
You're
like,
Christian, right?
what? I think my friend said it best. Biden's the type of guy you want to have to deal with, because he seems like a, affable, nice guy from Scranton. But Trump's the type of guy to tell you to put on a few pounds, you need to lose some fucking weight. So, at the end of the day, if their governance style regarding international relations, domestic policy and whatnot, if there's really not that much of a difference, like, we always like to talk about how Trump is a racist, or Trump has said very disparaging things to minorities over the years.
Everyone should be their own country. We should have 7.6 billion different countries in the world. Everyone should be their own country, their own laws, and their own everything, man.
Okay, I don't know.
Instead of a
At
name,
that point, what the hell's even a country?
name, it should be the name of the country when you're born. What country are you? It's the best way, man.
So if that's the case, then, hey, if my country has a constitution that's saying that murder is perfectly fine, could I just murder your country? I mean, is that perfect?
I don't know. My constitution says, hell no. My gun is my constitution.
Yeah. Interstate conflicts would be pretty intense in that type of situation. Huh?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on it? The whole, like,
I think it's just the way the system is, like, it's become, I don't know, it just seems like so disconnected to most people at this point.
Yeah.
And what is a presidency? Like, you say back in the day, in the 1800s, anybody could walk into the White House and actually meet the president. Like, you hear like Abraham Lincoln, people before his assassination, people would walk into the White House and just, if he was available, go talk to him. Obviously, maybe you won't be able to get to him every day, probably a large crowd or something, but nowadays it's become so disconnected. And you could say it's for security reasons, because look what happened to Lincoln, but in general, it's become so disconnected to most people. Closest you'll get is you see somebody at a rally, a campaign rally.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like they live, I feel like a lot of politicians and professional class people, they live like in a bubble now, almost.
A Washington bubble, yeah.
Yeah, Washington bubble, so they really know, connected to people and know what's going on, what people really need. They're supposed to represent people, represent the citizens in their districts, in their states, but are they really representing them when their interests are so disconnected from the interests of people? Study after study has indicated that, that what people want policy-wise is not enacted into law by the representative.
Yeah.
So it's just strange, man. It's not really democracy, If it's gonna be like more of like an oligarchy, then they should just say it's it's like but democracy has just been so watered down, and just kind of like just like I don't know, like watered down and just pretty much like cracks put into it. The foundation of a democracy is like cracking, if eventually it could crumble if we don't do something about it.
Definitely. That's also emblematic of the current gridlock in Congress right now with the stimulus. I mean, Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate were able to jam in a Supreme Court justice in record fucking time, but he literally convenes the senatorial session right after they got their wish, their justice. So while millions of people are going hungry right now, millions of people may be evicted from their homes, evicted from their rental complexes and whatnot. They're talking about there was record GDP growth, 33%, but what does that really mean to your person working in an office environment, or someone working in, a factory that had to close down? It's very disconnected from reality, it's almost like we're living in two different Americas, and it's ironic because they want to make the two different Americas based on cultural grounds. There's red states and blue states, there's Rachel Maddow fans, and then there's Sean Hannity fans.
I mean,
but in actuality, the two Americas is more based on a class issue,
I don't know, man. It's like that large, esoteric, stuff. It's just kind of like people like to live in groups. We're social animals, So it's like if it's not political parties, it's gonna be a sports team. It's gonna be like something, some kind of thing that's gonna, or a show or a movie. People like, but it's just like, what kind of society do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a society where citizens are actually involved in politics, involved, and like they actually care what's going on, or do you want it to be a society where it's like no one gives a fuck what they're voting on in Congress, really? Not, or most people don't really pay attention to it, at least. You know what I mean? Like, like me and you don't really pay attention, like what's being voted on the congressional floor every day.
Yeah.
It's like democracy. I don't know. It's like, if really was like, and what about like referendums, direct votes from the actual public, like what England did with the referendum to leave the EU.
Mm-hmm.
If it really was direct democracy, wouldn't the people be voting on things like whether healthcare should be universal or not, or anything, gun rights, or shouldn't the people, the public be, and not not these politicians? I understand it's supposed to represent democracy, but when these representatives become so disconnected from the public, is it really? And people aren't paying attention to what these representatives are voting on in their record. At least they really, it's not really talked about on the news, these politicians' record, until their campaign time comes up. Then what's the point? You know, it's like that's the real issue. I think it's like all these like different situations that are happening. They're the symptoms of the system. So it's like looking at like, oh look, this guy was just elected. This person's doing this. It's like, yeah, that's just what's on the news. But like, if we want like citizens to be more involved, then I think it's like we need to look at like what maybe direct democracy, where people actually vote on it instead of electing people to vote for you on things. And that's a lot of work. People have jobs, they have families, but we have to at least take into consideration that it might be a better way of doing things, or at least a more efficient way of doing things. More, if you want it to be a democracy, that's a more democratic way of doing it. If you want it to be more, like I said, more as like maybe it's not necessarily always the public that exactly chooses things. It's people, I guess, like I said, more professional class, or they decide more. Then that's another thing. If you want that, but it's like
it's almost like
complicated,
it's on their terms.
It's complicated, but it's like, what do you want? What do we want to be as a society? And it's like sometimes we get so caught up in like these not just polarization, but in these narratives that are put into that are part of the news. But it's really about what do we want it to be, the structure of the society itself. Not like getting caught into. It's like watching a TV show, watching it constantly. It's like, oh look what happened now. Look what Trump said. Look what look who they're electing now. But but you have no say in all this, or very little, right? Because just
how concentrated power is.
But it's like, so we need to talk about like this, how we can, if citizens want a voice and if citizens feel frustrated, right? They feel like, what the fuck's going on? These politicians are corrupt. There must be something crazy going on. Some kind of conspiracy. You want to try and like mitigate that. People feel less frustrated. Then make it a more of a direct democracy. Make it somehow people more involved. Make it into like, I don't know, educate people more on the political process. I'm not saying on ideologies. They can do that maybe in their own time, but the political process, how, more about the Constitution, or more about how legal things happen. Because a lot of times people get caught up in the justice system. They don't know anything about like law or like their rights. So teach that. You don't have to teach about liberal or conservative. I'm talking about like just so they know more about that. Like I feel like we have to be more involved, because the more apathy there is, then the harder it's going to be for people to really like. Then the more apathy there is to politics in general and in the public, then it's going to be easier for like once every 4 years to rile them up out of nowhere, because all of a sudden they're not going to know what led up to it. The pieces that led up to that situation happening, or like Trump being elected, or manufacturing jobs being sent overseas. It's going to think like, oh, the Democrats did this or Republicans did that. And it's like they're just playing for your emotions at that point. If you really want,
at this point,
knowledge is the greatest thing, right? If you want more knowledge of what's going on, how these policies are being constructed, then you need to have like a more open, transparent view of it. But some of these votes in Congress too, I think they're not made public, right?
No.
That's the thing. They should be public. It's a democracy. The people. It's supposed to be the will of the people. And there's a lot of like, especially like in the past in America, there's a lot of thoughts about large part of the population shouldn't have the right to vote. And I'm not talking about women or the African Americans. I'm talking about people with was considered lower IQ, or people who are uneducated. So like some people think
So
that.
in other words, white men that didn't have any property.
Well, yeah, and just like not just history, even now,
Yeah.
some people think that most people shouldn't be able to vote, or at least a large segment of society shouldn't be able to vote because they're not educated enough, they don't follow the policy enough. So it should just be people who are educated on it, or there should be some kind of test to see what your competency, I guess, and whatever you want to call it, in the political process, or what's going on. It's like, so I don't know. It's like, it's a debate to be had. Like, should democracy be grown, or should it be confined? To make a more efficient society that.
Yeah, but wouldn't like a confined democracy lead more to apathy though? Because
probably, but like if people have the right to vote now, right? You can say yes, that's limited. There's a lot of voter suppression that does go on.
Yeah, facts.
We could bring up many studies about that. There's a lot of voter suppression that goes on, but it's like if apathy reigns, then it's pretty much like you're not. It's like people don't take into that right to vote anyway.
It's just that I have like huge reservations.
Oh, I do too.
Leaving the power to like so-called philosopher kings, like the
I do too.
aristocrats.
I do too. It's just like the that perspective still needs to be like
analyzed.
Analyzed.
Kind of reminds me of a discussion between two early 20th century like reformers, John Dewey, Walter Lippmann. I mean, if you guys want to check out, you can just type in Walter Lippmann versus John Dewey on YouTube. It's a really interesting philosophical discussion that's related to the discussion that we're having right here. But it's based on the argument about how much more democracy should we have? Should we have more democracy, or should we have less? Should we have as many people to vote, or should we have less people to vote? I think it is a very philosophical conversation, because I don't know what the right or wrong answer to that question is. I mean, me being taught liberal values of civic duty, especially me being a black man for generations where my ancestors weren't granted the right to vote, and even when they were, it was highly suppressed in their ability to do so. And you can even make the argument, even to this day, that's unfortunately still the case. I mean, when I was down in Florida, I was working on a campaign, and I was just trying to inform a lot of people in our generation, like millennials, Gen Z, multiracial kids about the importance of voting, and letting them know, listen, if let's say you're coming down to Florida and you're originally from New York or New Jersey or whatever, you have to make sure that you're not kicked off the voter rolls back in your home state or whatnot. And these type of discussions are important to have, because listen, like right now, for instance, they're talking about how this election is going to be one of the biggest in turnout in almost 100 years. Would that help Biden, or would that help Trump, or does it even really matter in the grand scheme of things? There's these discussions that can be rather contentious, to say the least. What do you think?
I mean, listen, again, I think it's largely about this structure of this society in general. What do we want the citizens want for our society? Do we want it to become more individualistic in a sense, whereas everyone's kind of going fighting their own journey and kind of forging their own path, and they find healthcare for themselves, they do what they or do you want to have more working together in a sense, where you have a larger social net, support net for different things like welfare programs, or universal basic income, or universal healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we really were a directive democracy, or if our leaders really represented the will of the people, we would have had universal healthcare by now. We would have paid sick leave. We would, be out of the wars. We would be doing, these so-called hippy-dippy, things. I mean, people don't give us enough credit. We're a lot more I don't want to say left-wing per se, but we're a lot more economically populist than our politicians were let on. It's just that, like you said, every 4 years they rile people's emotions on largely cultural issues, there's a reason why, like, so many working class, white Americans, you routinely vote Republican. It's not because they like Mitt Romney's tax plan, you know what I mean? Or they like the fact that Donald Trump allegedly only paid $750 in taxes one year.
Yeah.
It's because they riled them up on social issues, on Roe versus Wade, on gay marriage, on, stem cell research, all these, things that, look, I mean, if you're, regardless of what side of the aisle you are on those issues, it's not to say that those issues aren't important, but it's taken away from, for instance, issues on corporate power, like, how many people know about, for instance, the recently induced Justice Amy Coney Barrett's views on corporate power, on unions. Apparently she cited on a case where if you work for if you're like a contract worker for like Uber Eats or Grubhub or whatnot, and let's say you're working more hours than you should and you want to file for overtime pay, you can't sue the employer. You can't sue like a company like Uber Eats or Grubhub. You have to go for arbitration. If you go for arbitration, it's almost certain that you're going to get killed in court. So she sided on the corporation side on that case. So it's those type of cases or those type of issues that nobody really wants to talk about, which I get it. I guess it's not as sexy as, are you pro-choice or are you pro-life, But that's how they captivate the country every 4 years. I mean...
Well, that you talk about, captivate the country. It's like, it comes like I said, emotional roller coaster for people because of entertainment. That's what I mean, though. We need to have some kind of structure where people need to look at things on their own, to become educated citizens, to become involved, and to not fall into these like thinking patterns where this side is because this person is conservative politician, I'll listen to them. This person is more liberal politician, I'll listen to them.
Yeah.
And it's like it's got to be more based on the policy and not being led by reactionary politics, reacting to something. Instead, it should be to look into it and to realize that manipulation is a part of politics.
Yeah.
They're politicians in some ways are trying to manipulate you. So it's like we need to have some. It's like either I think the best way, or I think an efficient way for citizens to not end up in this cycle, as even just as a population, as a country, for the citizens not to end up in this cycle of reactionary politics. Best way is whether on their own or through the education system or a mixture of both, to learn to discern between the nuances of things, that there's gray areas, and policies are complicated, so to look into it, to try and look into the facts, look at multiple sources, to weigh the sources with each other and against each other, and people can learn to do that in schools, or they can learn to do that on their own, whatever they think is best, But it's like we have to have that conversation too, because an uneducated or an apathetic population it's good for, like I said, it's good for some politicians who want to rile up the public to do like puppets, but you actually want a democracy, it's better to have citizens that are educated.
That's what John Dewey said.
Yeah, it's better to have citizens.
I mentioned that before in the John Dewey-Walter Lippmann debate, where he was on the side of like the most maximalist version of democracy, where you want the most amount of people being involved in the political process, and he was a social reformer, he was an educator, and his view was you needed to reform education. Because now at the time in the early 20th century, education was going through a transformative period. Many schools still had prayer in schools, and there was like sort of the schism between schools, particularly in the cities that started teaching evolution and schools.
Monkey trial, right?
Yeah. So it was like a very weird time in American history in that sort of transformative period, and he felt that that education needed to be reformed for the 20th century into this sort of modern, postmodern direction. Valuing science over, I don't want to say fairy tales, because look, I'll admit I am a bit of a religious man myself, but there should be a distinction between what you believe in on Sundays and how you operate on a logical framework every other day of the week. You get what I'm saying? I understand that's a little bit hypocritical, I guess, but that's sort of like how like Americans have operated for the last 100 or so years, where sure, people go to church on Sundays, people have maybe their own beliefs held, maybe they may not be necessarily confined to, one of the three major Abrahamic religions or Hinduism, but they still have like a very spiritual, sense of understanding. But we also value things like reason,
Well, what do people
Socratic
want?
method and whatnot. And so those type of things are important. And so how we're going to progress that forward as a nation, I mean, it's these conversations on how do we, educate the public? How do we, like for instance, with the coronavirus going on right now, there's so many people that, have stern views on, the coronavirus is fake. It's this, hoax. It's this, made genetically in the lab. But then again, who really knows? But at the same time, there's the other side of the public that wants to listen to the experts. They want to listen to science. They want to so there's a balance in that.
Well, the coronavirus again, it's just coronavirus shows what's underneath the surface of the country already.
Yeah.
Some people are going to be they want authority to take power for them.
Yeah.
They like security, they like comfort. Other people are more like, don't impede on my ground. Don't
my liberty. Yeah.
My liberty. Don't tell me what to do. You know what I mean? You can't.
Give me liberty or give me death.
And other people might say more like, listen, let's wear a mask for each other. And other people like, I don't have to wear a mask. So it just shows that. But largely, I think larger than anything, what goes beyond religion is that everyone wants. I mean, most people, right? They want to have their own place to live, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they want a family. They want they want security, right? They want to know that where the next meal is going to come from. They want to be healthy, right? They want to have a fulfilling life. And what's the best way for people to have that as citizens in a country? What's the best way to give people the rights, not to give people let them have that freedom, or to enable them to have freedom, and to accomplish those things. Because beyond religion, I think everyone wants to live a good life, live comfortably, to have food on the table, have a place to stay, to experience joy and happiness. So it's I think that's the thing too. Like, what kind of society can we build that everyone can really have the freedom to do that? And
but it's
have
not
the
even
ability
just for ourselves, but also for our brothers and sisters, for our neighbors.
That as well, yeah.
And that's a very humanist perspective. And so it's sort of like I was saying before, it's sort of is what's unique about the West in the last 100 years, where people can still have whatever faith they want, Hinduism, Christianity, maybe even agnosticism or atheism, but we all understand that we're all in this together, The problem is that it's just it's like what Matt Taibbi, he wrote a very good book called Hate Inc. about a year ago. It's about how, unfortunately, corporations have used the media to sort of make dividing lines of very stark cultural issues, like pro-Russiagate, anti-Russiagate, or pro-gay marriage, anti-gay marriage. We break each other down in these sort of stark cultural. Thanks, man. We break each other down in these very stark cultural realms, and it's a shame, because I feel like if you were to ask most people what do you think about your neighbors? Most people say, I like my neighbors. My neighbors,
they could be a little farther.
No, but I guess.
A little too close.
Well, I guess if your neighbors are in New York, then yeah, But I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's easy to cast judgment on someone who a caricature of what you see as a stereotypical Republican if you're a Democrat, or the caricature of a Democrat if you're a Republican. But it's that same vitriol you don't really experience if your neighbor happens to be or happens to not to be a Trump supporter, happens to not to be a Joe Biden supporter. I feel like when you bring things down to a very microscopic level, people are the whole point, man. It's just the fact that we like to put up caricatures of the stereotypical right-wing Karen, or the stereotypical liberal wine mob. But at the end of the day, our neighbors are sort of like an extension of family. So regardless of what your neighbors may believe, they may be outward of it, or maybe they're a little bit more recluse about it. But nonetheless, if we can look past the differences on a very interpersonal level, it does kind of give me hope that we can one day move past that, even in a national level. Once again, like you were talking about before, it requires a very comprehensive conversation, and that conversation can't just be every 4 years. It can't just be like candidate X believes in this list of issues and candidate B believes in this list of issues. It has to be a comprehensive conversation that's ongoing.
Yeah, because the world's changing, and technology changed. A lot of things change. So like it's important to keep having dialogue and conversations about it. Just I don't know, just try and develop a nuanced view of things. Because I don't know, people want to feel safe, they want to feel secure, they want to feel free also at the same time, not restricted.
Because in that book, Hate Inc., which by the way is a really great book, highly recommended for you political junkies out there, definitely check it out, Hate Inc. by Matt Taibbi. It talks about how, like, at one point in the various different points in history, the nation mobilizes against this sort of, like, external front. So, throughout much of the 20th century, it was the Soviet Union, the Russians, because we were in the midst of the Cold War. 20 years ago, when we were growing up as kids, it was, scary brown men in the Middle East with terrorism and whatnot. As the war on terrorism, not to say that it's drawn down, because a lot of people don't realize we're still in Afghanistan, we're still in Iraq, we're still in a lot of these foreign experiments. Nonetheless, we're still in these places. Well, I mean, it's a nation. Yeah, it's a nationwide experiment on Hispanic democracy.
Yeah, we're raining down democracy on them.
We're just like
killing them with democracy.
We're flying aircrafts and deploying like Big Macs and like McNuggets and like Top Gun DVDs onto the Iraqi people. We're trying to expand democracy, but the point is that there was this sort of like external front that the media wanted you to like mobilize against, this unified boogeyman. But when that stuff doesn't become as salient or as catchy to the American people anymore, because we become so apathetic to conflict, they decide to make the new boogeyman your neighbor. They decide to make the boogeyman the wine mom in New York City. They decide to make the boogeyman the Karen in the suburbs driving a Cadillac Escalade.
Yeah, it's literally divide and conquer. The less exposure you have to people with certain ideologies, easier to turn them into like a monolith of something where they're the same, they're this, they're that. It's easier to brand them as something, to turn them into. It's just like, it's tough. It's really, like you said, it's just the culture, and the culture is diverse. It's nuanced. There's different, It's not all the same, but.
Well, I want to be careful. I don't want to turn this into like sort of like a class reductionist like argument, because look, I mean, there are important issues that are pertaining to the culture war, such as affirmative action, climate change, racial justice, social justice, etc. But
your social justice warrior.
But I guess my main issue is.
You triggered, bro?
I guess my main issue is that like ironically enough, I feel like we're culturally reductive, if that makes any sense. Like we're culturally reductionists. Like everything's drawn down to culture. And that doesn't necessarily mean the other stream has to be everything down to class. I think both things can be intersectional and important in trying to understand and solve phenomenon in society. Once again, it's not an easy conversation to have, though.
It's really about like how do most people like navigate their lives, though. Like do they navigate their lives thinking about like political system, or is it more like their social group, their social system? their romantic relationships, their friend groups, their job, their career. So it's like a lot of times I feel like politics feels disconnected because it's just like, oh, look at this policy, look at this bill proposed, look at this. It's just like a bunch of like maybe boring legislation. It's not, like
Yeah.
it has to become ingrained and real. When it's something like social issues like LGBTQ or racial justice, it's like more like about the social, because we're social animals. But in something, of course, like something like I don't know about something going on, foreign wars going on far away. I think it can be harder for people to understand and really be interested enough to.
How do you get people's attention
nuance,
in those type of How do you get people's attention? Because we can't necessarily ignore those important cultural issues, but at the same time, you also have to make sure that we're fully aware of a whole and encompassing agenda that the powers that be want to
Well, one way is to have show people how it could affect them. But how can it affect you personally? Because that's one way people if it's going to affect them, they're more likely to be interested in it. And be proactive with it. I mean, again, it's more just like the mindset. You have to it's like we have to like foster a mindset or let that mindset grow. Sometimes censorship in a lot of different ways can, or lack of transparency in the military. I'm not saying to talk about military strategy or maneuvers, but at least like have transparency in a sense like of why we're supposedly in war or what's going on in some ways. And
I think
it is a government agency though. It's a government agency, and just I don't know. It's like.
But you also think it's a little bit of personal agency too, though, because obviously there's government agency in the sense that they're the ones that are co-signing, these military ventures, or they're the ones co-signing, policies.
I mean, listen, whether you're
that really impact our lives, but should you say that's also personal agency? Like it's up to us as the individuals to make the difference in informing the public, because we can have these philosophical conversations all day about ideally what the educational system should be, or ideally what an informed public should look like. But how do we get there?
Well, I know what you're trying to ask.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, best way again, I guess, would be like an educated citizenry. That's. And again, it's like, oh yeah, you can well, how do you get that? And it's like, yeah, it could be through schooling. In school you could teach like how political systems are supposed to work. And I feel that's part of it is maybe if people don't think if they don't know how what the hell's going on in the government, how things are actually run, it's complicated. So maybe that could be like a barrier to it too. Simpler just to think, oh, there's a president. All right, vote for them. That's going to make change because they they realize the mechanics behind it. And to show people why they haven't invested interest in it, whether because affects them personally, or invested interest because there's what's beneficial for a society will be beneficial for them, or just like a sense of community, they're a part of this country. A lot of reasons a lot of people don't vote too is like people of color, men don't vote because they don't feel like they're a part of this country sometimes, they're disenfranchised.
I feel that as well.
Be disrespected. So it's like, there's gotta be something.
I don't feel represented by either candidate, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I mean, Donald Trump's a flagrant racist, and Joe Biden, while he seems nice enough, he's, done racist policies. So it's just like...
Yeah, the crime bill.
Yeah, 94 crime bill. He, ironically enough, pushed Ronald Reagan and George Bush on the right on the war on drugs.
That too, and he also was for the segregation of the busing, right?
He
was not.
He eulogized like a fucking segregationist. So, and Donald Trump, he's not going to get off the hook, and he called 14, 15-year-old black kids in Central Park racist thugs and calling for the death penalty on them. So it's just, what choice do we really have? I mean, that's the apathy that I can explain on behalf of me being a black male. Now, I'm lucky enough that I didn't necessarily grow up in the hood. Like, I grew up, working class, up the ladder into, middle class, lifestyle. But knowing, having family members and whatnot, I can speak in somewhat behalf that, look, a lot of black men just feel like the system doesn't represent us, why didn't, those few thousand black voters in cities like Flint, Michigan and Detroit didn't turn out for Hillary Clinton 4 years ago? Because they just got tired after a while, like they just feel like the system doesn't really represent them. I mean, you have governors, poisoning their water, no accountability whatsoever. They had the first black president, Barack Obama, famously took a sip of the water from Flint, Michigan, and said, "It's good to drink, but it wasn't good to drink." So people are just, there was a sense of hope when Obama became president. I feel like, particularly with people of my color, and even people all over. I'm sure maybe you weren't really following politics back then. I mean, me neither. But I guess being a middle schooler at that time and always imagining what the first black president would be like, there was like a sense of optimism. Like, wow, we have this man, this very articulate, intelligent black male who's going to, deliver change. Reform institutions. Lead us into a progressive 21st century. And in a lot of ways, that didn't really materialize.
And again, that goes back to education, because if people are if citizens in general are more educated in the sense that they realize that the president only has certain powers.
Yeah.
The president is just a small part of the larger government, and the that pretty much its presidency is a small part of the apparatus that creates laws, changes laws, creates policies, votes on things, enacts laws.
Yeah.
Then I think they have they wouldn't put so much focus on the presidency itself. They would also focus on congressional seats.
Yeah.
Judge appointments, just.
And not even just that, but also just local politics.
Local politics, mayors, governors.
Politics is local. Everything starts from the grassroots. I mean, how many people will have strong opinions on Donald Trump or Joe Biden, but do they have strong opinions on the mayors of their towns, or the local councilmen, or the township managers and whatnot? Probably not, because a lot of people don't really pay attention to that shit. Let's be real here. That's part of maybe 50 or 60 years ago, people paid attention a little bit more to that type of stuff. I feel like with the sensationalism of American politics in the last 50, 60 years, you had, JFK and his assassination, you had the Watergate scandal, you had Iran-Contra with Reagan and all this stuff, Monica Lewinsky with Bill Clinton. Politics has become so sensationalized nowadays that, we don't really pay attention to what's going on in the grassroots, It's just, yeah.
That's crazy, man. But
yeah. That's the stuff that directly impacts your life the most. What goes on in your local communities, like the voting record of local council members and changing zoning laws, or approving, toxic, waste, into various, into the atmosphere or whatnot. That type of stuff is what directly impacts you the most, but it's not really covered.
It just seems a lot of people they want to get their own house and they want to have their private property, and then beyond that, it's they want to have their own social life, their own thing. But the actual community sense of the mayor or the city council stuff, does that really resonate with them? And how do you make it resonate more instead of them just I want a house, I want private property, I want my own social life, my family, that kind of thing. How do you create that connection to the
because there's a clear connection when it comes to national politics, as we're talking about already with the culture war and whatnot. But how do you make that connection to local issues?
Or you just assume because you live in a conservative area or liberal area, whatever, that those local liberal or conservative politicians or candidates are going to be similar to the national ones, or be the same as the national ones. So I feel it can also be I know conservative and Democrat painting with a broad brush, because it's a lot of different
ideas on what society should be like, but you have to address them in very materialistic, ways.
I think the best way is to get involved in a local spot. I don't know. I guess try and do something where you just start. Try and meet real people, real honest, even if they have different ideologies. Don't put someone off just because they, on the surface, they seem to like think differently politically.
Yeah.
'Cause you realize you might have a lot more common than you realize.
Yeah, definitely.
And that you might end up having a fulfilling conversation or actually make a new friend or whatever. Just
Yeah.
like you'll have a real, you might realize something.
Like one thing I noticed is whenever I work for a few campaigns, and when you do door-to-door canvassing, sometimes it actually does produce pretty interesting and intriguing conversations, especially if you're knocking on the door of someone who disagrees ideologically with the candidate that you're working under, and you can lead to some fruitful conversations, and sometimes you are able to change people's minds, and you're able to have them see a different perspective, and maybe you yourself also see a different perspective. We can't be we can't be afraid of ideas, and I guess that's where we agree with it in regards to censorship and whatnot. Like we should fight bad speech with good speech. Like we should be able to
Bad speech and good speech.
or whatever. Like it's just we should have whatever the best
bad speech, only good speech. Because it's 1984, man.
Hey man, let the best speech win.
The speechiest speech of them all.
Yeah, man. Hear my TED Talk, on free speech. I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, though, I think that's kind of how we go forward, is like you were saying before, getting directly involved in, local politics and talking to members of the community, talk to the person with the Trump sign in their front yard and ask them what they think, try to, instead of judging them based on the caricature, or the preconceived caricature that you would like to envision them as, and talk to them like they're your brother, they're your sister, they're your best friend for 15 years.
Yeah, just go out with open mind. Go out there,
open mind.
Go out there, talk to people with open minds, and just see where it goes. Don't like you said. Sometimes it's preconceived notions that hold us back. So just go out there, open mind, and don't be afraid to really interrogate your own beliefs. Don't be afraid to think about why do I think the way I think? Is it because it's based in critical thinking, or is it based in because I've been told this?
Yeah.
Or it resonates, or somebody's trying to get a reaction out of me, and that they try to build an emotional connection to some idea.
That's an uncomfortable truth for a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you have an emotional connection with a certain idea? And is that logical, or is it, like I said, an emotional reaction you've had?
And it's not necessarily a right or wrong thing. I mean, it's just it's just being true to yourself, analyzing how you think and going from there. Once you're confident in your own skin, then you're all right going out in the world and talking about different ideas with people. How many people I've gone into heated conversations with, but we always dab each other at the end of the day and cool off, because it's about being able to articulate what you think about the world, and having an open mind to be curious. If you wake up every day with the ambition that I want to learn something new, you'll never be disappointed in life.
Yeah. You'll know everything by 35. Well answered.
All right. Well, that was our inaugural episode of what do you want to name this podcast?
I don't know. That's the podcast.
The I Don't Know podcast.
Who gives a fuck?
Who gives a fuck, Who gives a flying fuck? No, I'm kidding.
Who gives a flying fuck?
No, it was fun.
Nobody's listening.
Yeah. Fuck.
That'll be our podcast. Nobody's listening.
Yeah.
If this podcast sucks,
we got our 5 fans.
That's not my fault.
But hey, maybe this conversation, influence you to, think critically about these issues and, share the news, share the story, share the narrative. I don't know what the hell I'm saying right now.
Right. It's on my first podcast, so I might be a little rough.
Yeah. Take care, guys. Have a good one.